to BADragon Master. Today we're looking at the Light of Xaryxis module that came with the 5e version of Spelljammer. I'm not going to go over too much detail on this, the actual module. We're just going to kind of like talk about what I liked and didn't like about this module, and if I think it's a good starter module for entry into Spelljammer universe. So the first thing I want to say is the entry story, where you get you into space using the seed drop and then the galleon flying to space. This particular story is good. It's a good way to get your characters from a ground-based environment into Wildspace. And it doesn't matter what world you're on, it's a good way to move them up. And it uses a disposable character. There's a lot of disposable characters in this because they wanted to introduce you to the races. They want to introduce you to the ships. They want to introduce you to a couple different concepts. So the ground combat, whether it's on ship or on land, so to speak, is the same as any other 5e adventure. You roll for initiative, you do your actions, you move your characters, you beat down your opponents, and you move on. Where this has a more whimsical approach is there's a couple different choose-your-own adventure paths. So let's take this first little adventure that most people have probably seen. And in this case, the crystal spire starts growing, causing rampant damage around town. And the captain of the galleon says, "Hey, come with me, let's get out of here." You have options. You can either stay and fight the little creatures that the spire throws off, or you can try and help people in town, or you can just run for the ship. They give you multiple options in here on how to get your players on the boat and into space. So if your players fight the monstrosities and they don't realize it's futile because they're just going to keep coming, you can have the captain come pick them up. If the party goes to the docks, you have the option of role-playing out this adventure with the crime boss and determining whether or not he gets onto your galleon, or if he gets onto one of the other ships, and goes away. And those are the kinds of things that the DM can role-play out with the players, and eventually they can move forward with it. So it's good. It's a good way to get the players from a ground-based system into space. The next part of that particular adventure, slide down over here through, there's the destruction, there's the monsters, there we go, is there's an encounter with the Dark Star. And the Dark Star is trying to prevent any spelljamming ships from leaving the system, because they don't want anybody else knowing what's going on here. So you have this little space combat. They start really close to your ship. There are 2 ballistas on board your galleon. The McGonagall, which is a small catapult, is non-functional. And your captain says, "Hell with it," and just blows straight into them. This is the theme for the way 5e wants to think that you would handle space combat. Pirate ship, enemy ship, whatever pops up in visual range, you will instantly run straight toward them and go in for boarding. This is how they think people want to play the space adventure. Is that wrong? No. There are people who want to play it that way. And there's times that I agree. It's a good way to play it, depending on your party. There's also times that the previous second edition rules for naval combat that were used through 3rd edition and maybe 4th edition, I don't know for sure, but definitely in 2nd and 3rd and revised. Those naval rules gave you maneuverability of ships. It gave you turn radiuses. It gave you options on how to handle your ship. So we're not going to get into that too much detail. That'll be a separate video where I go over how to do miniatures. And I'm working on that right now, but we'll get there eventually. It takes time to do the animations, so don't worry about that. But that's what this adventure does. So it goes straight into that melee combat. And depending on how you handle that combat, again, depends on where you go next. And it's like a choose your adventure book. It tells you if you fail, if you're captured as prisoners, if you're thrown overboard, if you succeed the fight and you can travel onto the Rock of Brawl, and so on. It gives you all these little ways of, as a game master, dungeon master, to deal with it, and they're very role-playing based things, very RP based. So you've got to understand that that's the direction they went with this story, and it's the same direction they went with 5e, is they want the narrative. They want that big overarching narrative, and they want video game-like gameplay. Get your party in there, get them bashing and brawling, get the combat over with as quickly as possible, and then move on. So this opening adventure does do that well. It does the narrative well. It gives lots of room for roleplay. The way it's structured is you start at level 5, you could start lower, and there's ways you can level your characters up relatively easily if you start at level 1 by doing a prelude little adventure to rank up your characters a little higher, and then to go into this, or you just give them more experience. It's not that big of a deal. Or better milestones, depending on what system you're using. Or just make it easier. You can always dumb down the fights a little bit. Half the hit points, that kind of thing. There's ways around models that are too powerful for your characters, but you still want to play them. So keep that in mind. But this is their ship-to-ship battle. Here it is. This is it. It's real simple. There's not much to it, and this is exactly how they expect you to play all of these different adventures. There are half a dozen different ship-to-ship combats, and all of them play out the exact same. The ship comes up, it's at a certain distance, somewhere between 250 and 500. You have about 2 or 3 turns until you're at boarding range, and then you just board the ship, or they board you, depending on how it looks on the outline. Your players don't get the option to run, because why would they? They're players. They're just going to barrel in. At least that's the mentality. In a real Spelljammer campaign, you might run. You might see a ship come up on the border, and it's too big for you. You know you can't handle that ship, and you know it's a pirate. So you would run, and then you've got to handle, how does the DM handle the ships, because they're the same speed. You're running away, they're chasing, and now you can go to faster than light. That's the issue. And you have to roleplay that out, and the Dungeon Master then has to make checks and options and find ways around that problem. Again, the old rules had ways around this. I told you, you had ships, you had maneuvers, you had things that you could do to attempt to catch the opponents. So keep that in mind, that there's not a lot of in-depth concept here, and it's okay, because they just kind of gloss over all those rules, and that's one of the downsides a lot of people have to this, is it doesn't have a lot of those naval rules, but they're not going for miniatures, and without going for miniatures, you kind of keep it light. So it's a guessing game. It's hard for them to balance. Let's see. They do go over a lot of different ships. Like, here's a nautiloid that you can explore, and there's the different creatures and encounters. If you explore the ships, if you don't explore the ships, what you can do over at the Rock of Brawl, and so on and so forth. There is the downside I have to this particular adventure is they go through and they introduce you to everything, but every single encounter is new. Like, here's Commander Crux, who's a GIF. Like, the first ship was a human captain getting you off the planet, and then you make a deal with this GIF to try and get with the alliance that's attacking the astral elves, who's attacking your planet. And he has a ship. And depending on how you handle it will depend on if you stay with his ship or if you're on somebody else's ship, because you can lose his ship, you know. There's a point at which you get attacked by pirates, and if you fail, you're thrown a reward and you lose a ship, and they got a contingency for that. And you gotta find, you know, it's a lot of little things in this adventure, but they go through, there's his ship, it's a living ship, and they go through this, and they introduce you to basically every major race. They introduce you to a bunch of different, you know, points of interest. Like this one here's a one-time thing that you would have in your adventures. You'd create something like this. This little tower for this little wizard mage. I think it's a witch, actually. Who is out in the middle of no man's land on her own little rock. And she knows crooks, and they're kind of friends, and so on and so forth. She helps you out a little bit, but you have to get her dinner. You know, it's little stuff like that. Little side adventures. So there's a lot of little things that they provide for you in this adventure. Yeah, like here you're out in a little rowboat chasing a big skeever, a big fish in space. But there's a lot of little things like that. The problems that I have with it, aside from the combat, is it throws so many new things at the players that it's hard to cope. So here's an example. This is a undead pirate. This is a vampire pirate. So they call them vampirates. Or vampirates. The vampirates, you know, they're a formidable foe. In this case, it happens to be a friend, but it's a formidable foe, and they'll take you to the meeting place that Crux was going to take you if you lose Crux's ship. You'll meet up with them here early versus meeting up with them when you're supposed to meet up with them later on. And you go through all of this narrative story to get to where you're going. And the way you're going is in part 3 in Doomspace. You're going to meet up with the people who are trying to stop the elves. There's a whole bunch of people in here. Doomspace should have been fleshed out more. It really wasn't. Like, here's a brief description of Doomspace and a map for it. So you can play adventures in Wildspace if you wanted to. They give you enough, but it's just barely enough. You know, just barely enough. And it's got a unique object, the Eye of Doom here. It's instead of a star. I don't know if it's a black hole or if it's just a collapsed star. Almost creatures don't assume the vortex is destructive force. It might be a gate to another dimension or alternate reality or another Wildspace system. So they're playing the black hole card. That's one of the wonderful things in science fiction, black holes being wormholes to another system, another location in space. That's something that you can play with your party. They give you a lot of those little types of hooks for your party. So there's a lot of different things in here that are good. Now, this is the last section. Would I play this with a party? Now, I did. I did actually play this with a party locally. We did it in an afternoon. It's like 4 hours long, but we did it in an afternoon. We played through it, and we had a good time. But every single player that was playing with me was already familiar with Dungeons and Dragons. They were already familiar with how to play a character. They were familiar how to roleplay. They were familiar with all this. So if you have a veteran party, this is a nice little adventure to kick you off and get you into space. I And it's a cool adventure. It really is a pretty decent adventure. But because of the fact that it's meandering, you go through a bunch of different areas, a bunch of different paths, places, locations. You have a bunch of different encounters, all in a very short period of time. Your players aren't going to remember or retain anything. Unless they're experienced players. Then they might. They're not going to really enjoy this campaign if it's their first one. Because it's meant to give a dungeon master and a party a nice little excursion on how to get out of there. So, what I would recommend is, yes, play this campaign with your party, but do not actually treat it as anything serious. There's a lot of loopholes in here. There's a lot of what ifs. I do accommodate a lot of them, but you do have to take into consideration there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to just kind of gloss over in this. It's okay. It's not that bad. So because of that, would I recommend it for a good adventure? No, this is not a good adventure. It's a mediocre adventure. It's a nice little, hey, let's get you into space. But honestly, I would go through and modify this first adventure. If you want to get your party off the ground into space, I would modify this. And how I would modify it to make it work is I would say, yep, have them drop this little crystal thing to Extra City. Have them kill half a dozen of these little, where are they? Here, these astral blights. So have these astral blights invade the city. From that, have them have a few encounters of that, role-playing around town. That section's fine. But then, when you go to space, have them go to space the way that this kind of does. And when they get involved with the Dark Star, change the narrative. Have them find the control device for the thing that's creating the blights in your town, and have them find the control device, and then be able to disable it, destroy it, whatever. Have it stop creating that. And then once it stops working, have that be the goal of the adventure. And then, once you're done there, your players would then continue to brawl with the rest of the refugees. And you may or may not have the Dark Star intel. But you would continue to brawl with the rest of the refugees. And then you would start your space adventures in brawl. Like you would normally start. Like, you're looking for work, you're looking for adventures, looking for a ship and its crew. Maybe you actually salvage the Dark Star. You know, maybe that's your ship. Maybe you sold it because you didn't want it. You know, maybe you decided, we don't want this ship, but we were able to salvage it, and you trade it or sell it for a ship that's more appropriate for your party. Okay, so maybe you want a galleon, or maybe you want a living ship, or maybe you want something that's got more cargo space, or whatever. Or if ever you're curious, want to play the party. Because the Rock of Brawl does have a shipyard, and you can buy, sell, and trade ships there. So that's where I would stop. I would get your party, through this, into space, modify the adventure so that you can stop the assault from the Dark Star, by stopping the Dark Star. And then, if your party's captured, well, you take them back to the base nearby, and have them do the normal escape from prison routine. And they steal the one ship in the hangar, the Dark Star, disable or destroy the component that's, and they find out that once they've been captured that they've harvested whatever they're harvesting from the planet, so the attack on your planet has been ceased. And you steal their ship and then, try and find a safe port. Because you can't, because you're not sure if you can take this thing down in the atmosphere, where are you going to go? And you find notes, about the Rock of Brawl, and you just go there, which is in the system. and then you start your adventures out that way. So there's a bunch of different ways you can handle it. But honestly, the rest of this with the whole elf empire and going through and finding the map and the Ari and changing ships 4 times and meeting every possible ship that you could possibly not want to run into, and then having to take on, you know, the Empire and stop them, and in the end, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but in the end when you stop them, you really do stop them and save your world. But it's like a bad movie, because it plays through so quickly and puts you through so many different scenarios just to show you what's going on, that it really doesn't work. So I would recommend just kind of stopping there, you know, doing that, stopping there, and then starting your adventure. Where do you go? So you've done this adventure, so you've either done the whole adventure or you've done, like I suggested with the parcel. You're on the Rock of Brawl. Let's assume you have a ship or one available to you that you've been able to hire or rent or buy. And now what do you do from here? The answer is what you've always done. You can pick any module. You can pick any adventure. You can write your own adventures. And you can then have them, and the only difference is you're flying in your Spelljammer ship from location to location instead of taking a caravan. That's my take on the Land of the Xaryxis. Let me know what you think about this adventure. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What do you think about the space combat? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time.